Hello, everybody, and welcome to the channel. I'm Steve. Today, I want to do a little follow up to the first video that I had where I explained my retirement plan and the way that plan didn't really work out. So, let me pick up kind of where I left off. Um, if you remember from the first video, and if you hadn't watched it, just go back and watch it so you kind of know what I'm talking about. But I had left my job at emergency services because I had to have back surgery. So, one of the things that I did when I was hired there was to uh, take out the short term and long term disability insurance policy that they offered. Most workplaces offer that. Um, and it's something that I'd had all my life, and I felt like it was a good thing. The premiums are usually pretty cheap, and it's a good fail safe in case you something happens and it's not a workers' comp kind of thing, and you have to be out of work and you don't have 6 or 8 weeks of sick time built up or even more. So I had again, I had signed up for the short term and long term disability. Now, with this particular municipality, if you wanted that coverage, then you had to pay the premiums yourself. That's a very important thing because, from a tax standpoint, if you pay the premium yourself, then you do not have to pay income taxes on the benefits you receive from that short term or long term policy. If your employer pays the premiums, that changes everything. That means that you have to pay federal tax on what you receive from the short term and long term policy. Uh, it's considered income. But if you pay the premium yourself, then it is not considered income and you don't have to pay taxes. So that was good. Now, with short term and long term disability policies, they usually pay somewhere between 66 and 60% of your gross salary. It's not, it's kind of a fail safe. It's a thing to give you a little bit of money uh, in case something happens and you're unable to work. This was the case that I had. So, when it came time for me to turn in my notice and leave prior to surgery, I went ahead and used up all of my sick days and I filed for short term disability. Now, short term disability lasts for 6 months. It was easy to file, I did it online. Uh, I received a phone call from a representative of the company and gave them a little bit of information, and in no time it was approved and I started receiving checks. After the 6 months, or as the 6 months were coming to a close, um, a representative of the company called me and said, "Hey, you're getting ready to reach the maximum for this policy, and if you're still out of work, then you'll have to switch to a long-term disability policy." That wasn't a big deal because I had that also. However, it did mean that I had to reapply because it's a completely different thing. Uh, so I reapplied for that, and again, there was uh, a little bit of inquiry from a representative of the company. However, uh, it wasn't a problem. It worked out just fine. I got the long term disability and things were going great. So, one of the things that the long term disability policy requires is that when you apply for long term disability benefits, you must file for Social Security disability. I didn't know that, and it kind of came as a surprise. because I didn't really consider myself disabled. I mean, I knew I couldn't do the job I had, and that's what the policy was paying, was that I couldn't do the job that the policy applied to. But either way, I went ahead and did, as the policy requires. And sometime around I guess it was summer of 21, uh, maybe, I don't know, maybe July. I'm not sure. Somewhere around in there. I applied for Social Security disability. Now, that wasn't that hard. You did it online. You just had to fill out some forms, and I think I may have had to submit some paperwork electronically. No big deal. Uh, of course, like a lot of first time applications, that application was denied. So I appealed, because you have a right to appeal. And part of this long term disability was that I had to appeal. Their, their requirements were that you applied for Social Security disability to the maximum that you could do it before they said, okay, you can stop. So I went and I did the appeal, and the appeal uh, was much different from the first one. It was just a lot of the same paperwork and maybe a little additional paperwork, but not much. After a while, I got notified that the appeal was denied. Well, the next step was a hearing at Social Security Disability Court. So, in accordance with the long term disability policy, I went ahead and filled out the paperwork for a hearing. At this point, the long term disability company told me, you're better off to have a lawyer, and we'll recommend one. We have one that we work with. Because I didn't know one, I said, okay, that's fine. I'll go with that. So the attorney contacted me. Uh, she was not too far from where I was, a couple of hours. Uh, Very familiar with Social Security disability hearings. She'd been doing it for a long time. She told me about her fee. It was not unreasonable. And she told me everything that she needed. And so I sent her a bunch of paperwork, and she essentially helped. She added supplements to the hearing application and so forth. After a little while, I was notified by Social Security that I had a court date. And something that they did at the time was they did not require you to go to court physically. I think somewhere back in COVID, they started doing telephone hearings. And I was okay with that. That meant that I didn't have to drive 2 hours to go to court. And it also meant I could get it done a lot faster. The backlog that they had for physical court appearances was really long. And the telephone hearing, I had one of those. They could give me one of those in, like, I don't know, maybe it may have been 6 months, something like that. I don't remember exactly. So we went through all the paperwork, got everything set up, and the attorney stayed in touch. She made sure that I had all the information that I would need for the hearing. And on the day of the hearing, the judge called me, and he did a three-way call between me and the attorney, himself, and the court reporter. Also, at the time, he had, I don't remember exactly what they called it, but it was like a vocational specialist. It's somebody they bring in that knows the books and the ins and outs of uh, qualifying disabilities. Now, understand that when I did my own research, the condition that I had, the spinal fusion, was a qualifying disability. However, I was still denied on the original application and the appeal. So the judge kind of ran things on the phone. Um, he asked some questions. The lawyer answered most of those questions. The judge did ask me specifically some questions, which I answered. And then he looked to the vocational expert, asked him some questions. Once he got done with everything, I'm going to say it lasted maybe 30 minutes, something like that. Um, and it was over. After that, the attorney called me and she said, okay, she said, we're done. She said, now we just have to wait. So we waited and we waited and we waited. In the meantime, I received paperwork from Social Security, which, by the way, they will blow up your mailbox with paperwork when you start this process. But I received paperwork from them stating that you've had your hearing, blah, blah, blah. Judge so and so is reviewing, and you will hear something from us in like 9 to 12 months or something like that. So I didn't hear anything. On down the road, maybe, I don't know, maybe 12 months later, may not be quite that long, I'm not exactly sure. I got a letter from Social Security that said that the judge had requested a supplemental hearing. I was like, okay. And he gave me they set a date, of course, a telephone hearing. So I called the attorney. I said, what's up with this? And she said, I don't really know. She said, I've never had one of those. She said, it could be good, could be bad. She said, maybe they just need more information. I said, okay. I said, but I have a little bit of concern. I said, I'm not available on the date of this hearing. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I actually have a trip planned. I'll be out of the country. And honestly, I don't want to cancel that trip. And she said, well, you can ask for a continuance. She said, that's generally frowned upon, but you can ask for it. Now, understand that the only reason that I was doing this whole Social Security disability thing was because the long-term disability insurance said that I had to. I would have never even considered doing it on my own, to be honest. I just wouldn't have. So I called the Social Security Disability Office and I explained my situation and I said, could I have a continuance? She said, you know what, I'll file it, I'll send it to the judge. She said, it's up to him. And I said, okay. So about maybe 3 months later, I guess, I got a letter that said that my continuance had been granted and it gave me the new date for the supplemental hearing. Okay, great. Of course, the attorney is copied on everything, so she's in the loop. So I went on my trip, came back, and the date for the supplemental hearing arrived. Just like the first time, the judge called, except this time the vocational expert wasn't there. It was just the judge, myself, and my attorney. And the judge, he said, there's something missing in the paperwork. He said, I can't find where your physical last day worked is in the paperwork. That's all he said. And I said, okay. And I told him when it was. He said, I need documentation from your former employer stating that that was your last day worked. I said, okay. He said, thank you, hung up, we were all done. The attorney called me back. She says, I'd have never believed that. She said, that's all that was about. And I said, yeah. I said, could they have not done that in mail or something? She said, probably, but that's not the way it works. So by the end of the day, I had already contacted Human Resources from my former employer, and I'd gotten a letter from them on letterhead stating my last day worked, and I had electronically mailed it to Social Security, who would get it to the judge. All done. Then I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. Now, of course, in all of that, there's the only thing you may get something from them saying that they're reviewing your case and a decision will be made soon. So just waited. In July of 2024, now remember, I started this process in about middle of 2021. In July of 2024, I actually saw a huge deposit into my checking account. And I was like, what in the world? And, it noted that it was from Social Security. So I called my attorney. I said, I don't know what's going on. She said, that means you won your case. And that is all the back pay that they're giving you because they go back to a year after the date of disability. She said, that's your back pay. She said, usually you get the money before you get the official notification. She said, when you get the official notification, I'll get it too, and we'll go from there. About 2 or 3 weeks later, now, by the way, she said, don't spend the money. She said, don't do anything with it, whatever you do. So 2 or 3 weeks later, I guess, I got the official notice of Social Security Disability Award from Social Security Administration. And in that paperwork, it said you'll be getting more paperwork to explain your benefit and so forth. So I said, okay, great. So I waited and waited. About, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks later, I got that packet. And in that packet, it talked about what my monthly benefit was going to be, and it gave a breakdown of the back pay. So at that time, everything was completed. I called the lawyer. She said, yep, everything's good. She said, we can wrap everything up. And I said, okay. So I asked her about paying her, and she said, oh, don't worry about it. I already got my fee. And I said, well, how'd you get your fee? And she said, well, they automatically deduct it out of your back pay and send it to me. And I said, oh, so I don't have to send you nothing. And she said, nope. She said, we get paid automatically. They just take it out. I said, okay, great. One less thing. So the big kicker came in. Another part of long-term disability, at least my policy, was if you were awarded Social Security disability, then you were required to repay the long-term disability not all, but a good bit of the compensation that they paid to you during your time of disability before you got the Social Security award. They won't let you double dip. You can't get their payment and Social Security. I was like, okay. I had by then I had read that in the policy and I knew that was coming. So the long-term disability company sent me a letter saying this is how much you have to pay back, and we will automatically deduct it from your banking account because they had already had the information so that the deposit could be made, and we'll take it out on such and such date. I said, okay. Not that happy about it, but hey, that's the way it worked out. Again, it wasn't all of it. It was a big chunk of it, but I was still left with some. So this whole process took roughly 3 years. 3 years, people. I understand that there is a tremendous amount of people that apply for Social Security disability benefits every day, and that they only have so many people processing. I get it. But if you have to go through that, expect that this is a very long process. I actually had a neighbor who went through the same thing, and his process was right at 3 years also. So that seems to be the standard. I talked to a few other people, and they all said, "Yep, yeah, about 3 years." Now, there is another kicker. Because you get this large lump sum of money, which is income, at least here in the great state of North Carolina, my taxes for that year were unbelievable, because it like tripled what my normal income would have been. Obviously, I didn't pay anything into it, and they don't withhold taxes when they give it to you. So, I talked to my accountant, and she said, "Look, yeah, you're going to have to pay a lot of money." She said, "You better hold out X amount," which I did. A good part of that was that a large portion of what I had to pay back to the long-term disability was tax deductible. So once it was all said and done, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It was still bad, because what happened is it changed my tax bracket. It moved me up like 2 brackets, because I went from a pretty low annual income to like triple. So essentially it cost me more money on my IRA and everything else. So, I kind of felt like I got screwed. However, I was happy that I won it, and I was just good. I was so ready to be over. This whole process, a lot of people quit after the first denial. They don't even appeal. And a lot of people quit after the appeal. A lot of people go to court and lose. One of the reasons they lose is because they don't hire an attorney. But that's not always the case. I remember one time my father went through the process, and he did hire an attorney, and he still lost. So it's not a given that when it goes to the hearing and you have an attorney, you're going to win. In my case, what won it for me was the vocational expert, because he told the judge, in reviewing the things that I had to do in my job description, mainly the lifting and so forth, and the fact that some of the things that I could not do meant that I couldn't carry the certifications that I had for emergency medical services. So essentially, I couldn't do the job. And that because of my age, and this kind of hurt, I was really too old to learn another job. Again, I kind of, I guess you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I kind of hurt my feelings a little bit, because I always thought I was trainable. But at any rate, the vocational expert is actually the one that won the case for me. I personally believe that. So, all said and done, 3 years worth of time. A lot of people never make it that long. They give up. If you are in that position where you're in the middle of that process, or you're considering that process, or you know someone that's going through it, I would highly recommend, tell them, number one, don't give up. Do not just throw in the towel and say, forget it. Because if you do that, then you're surely not going to get the benefits. And these are benefits that you paid into the system. And, if you can't work, you physically can't work, then you deserve those benefits. So don't quit. And I highly, highly recommend, if it does go to a hearing, get an attorney. Most of them, they have the same deal that, ambulance chasing attorneys do. If they don't win, you don't pay. So you really have nothing to lose. So there's my words of wisdom and the rest of my story through my retirement. I hope that this was beneficial, and maybe somebody out there that's going through this, this information will help you. A little bit of lengthy video, but either way, I hope you enjoyed it, got something out of it. I appreciate you watching the channel. If you like it, be sure to subscribe, like, and share it to somebody that could be benefiting from the information. If you have any questions about what we talked about, the whole process, feel free to comment. I will certainly answer as many questions as I can, understanding that I'm not an expert in it. I can only tell you about my experience. With that, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.